welcome to this week's episode of Pastor's Corner. For our very special Halloween episode, we are going to be talking about ghosts and hauntings and what those might actually be. So with me are Pastors Julie and Gunnar, and I do think that I've heard that both of you have an interest in this subject.
Really?
Really?
I know that I kind of do, but I don't think.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you did.
I appreciate Halloween and spooky things, but I wouldn't call it an area of interest. But yeah.
I probably shouldn't call it an area of interest because it's not really something that we should maybe be all that interested in, but I find it fascinating.
Okay.
Anyway.
So it is, it's a huge thing in our culture right now. We have a lot of reality shows, where they go out with little night cameras and they're walking through spooky buildings and there's noises and we have these little devices that measure something and recordings. And so can we talk a bit about, is that something that is supported biblically, the idea of ghosts or hauntings?
Well, I have watched those shows before, like Ghost Adventures and stuff like that. And actually recently, Ellis and I went to the old Idaho State Prison where there were a lot of executions and a lot of riots. And the prisoners that were held there were, really high intensity cases and convicts. But anyway, there was something spooky about it, and it was actually really interesting. I ended up finding out that same place had been featured on the Ghost Adventures show, and they had gone and checked out to see if ghosts were there. So anyway, I did watch the episode. But in terms of them being supported biblically, I'm going to let Julie start off with that and see what you think.
Yeah, well, it's not an area of interest of mine, but ghosts biblically, I don't think that there's much evidence supporting ghosts found in the Bible. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's one exception, the medium encounter of Saul.
The Witch of Endor.
The Witch of Endor? Is that who it was?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he went and visited, and he was just totally desperate. And then he went and wanted to call forth Samuel. And that's kind of an interesting one.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. One of the things that's interesting about it is that whatever happens, even the medium herself seems surprised by it. So I think that what we see sometimes that we would attribute as ghosts or hauntings are things that show that there is a spiritual world.
Gotcha.
Rather than it being a soul of a person, perhaps it's something different, I think that often we think that ghosts are tied to a person, right? That's why Saul was doing just that. He wanted to get advice from Samuel. And I don't think that we see that evidence for that happening. Maybe these shows, I've never seen one of these shows. I've only seen them parodied on Saturday Night Live, but maybe these shows tell us otherwise.
Well, the shows, a lot of times they do emphasize that ghosts are probably people who are kind of stuck in the world, that they haven't been able to pass on or find the rest that they need in order to move on in kind of the next phase of their spiritual existence. But you're right. I think that seems definitely extra biblical.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like it's the norm of the scriptures. And actually, a lot of times in the Torah and the first 5 books of the Bible, and then kind of extended onward, anything to do with mediums, calling forth spirits, interacting in that way, maybe even things like kind of in the witchcraft realm or in the psychic type realm, those sorts of things are banned to believers. And I think it's very likely because of that we would understand those things to be, yes, tied to the spiritual realm, but not the good side.
Exactly.
The bad side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you did mention that one of the popular beliefs is that ghosts are the spirits or the souls of people who, for whatever reason, can't move on. So if that's not what they are, what happens? What do we believe happens to a person's soul when they die?
Go for it.
Well, it's definitely a deep subject, and I want to be careful and caring about the way that we talk about this, because there are a lot of people that believe that their loved ones are still with them, that they're existing in the world. I've heard many people over the years say things like, well, I know so-and-so is looking down on me. Or whenever I see, a butterfly, or it reminds me of them, or it is them. Yeah. Some people will attribute that it is them, and that's almost when you get into reincarnation and these sorts of things. We as Christians don't believe in reincarnation, for example. We believe that when a person dies, that their body stays, right? And we have evidence of that. We see a person when they've passed, and then maybe they'll be cremated or buried or whatever. And but that their spirit, or that their soul goes to God, essentially. And that there's this intermediate experience for those who are not in Jesus, that they are separated from God in a place called Hades or Gehenna. There are a lot of different terms. The ordinary term is hell. And then for the believing person, for the Christian, that they are in the presence of Christ in heaven. But that's not the end. That's not the last state. That's what a lot of Christians have said over the years, is that a person dies and they're assigned to heaven or they're assigned to hell, and that's it. But there is a judgment that awaits all of us before God, and that is when the final destination of our souls is determined, and that's at the resurrection. Every person, whether they're good or evil or somewhere in between, but it's really the people who have been saved by Jesus and the people who are outside of that salvation, every person will be resurrected. They'll be given a resurrection body. And it is not natural for the human to exist with soul and body apart. We're ensouled bodies and embodied souls. And so at the resurrection and the judgment, our final destination, if you will, our existence in the age to come, whether life or death, will be experienced in both body and soul.
But it's a lot of information. Yeah, there's a lot of information, but it is clear that there is not an in-between for that soul and body when a person dies. There is no roaming the earth of a spirit that happens. It's clear that the body goes one place and the soul goes another.
Cases where there have been actual hauntings, I know there's video evidence of things moving around. Some of that certainly is probably people playing tricks, but some of it very well may be real. And so what then is the explanation for that if it's not their grandmother or the previous inhabitant of the house, or how do we explain that phenomena?
Yeah, well, I think that it points to the reality that there is a spiritual realm. Right? There is a unseen and sometimes seen realm. And when we talk about things like the angelic and the demonic, we read in scripture that even demons can masquerade as angels of light. Yep. And so I think that points to a little bit of trickery, not a little bit, a lot of bit of trickery from the devil and his minions. And I think that it is used to both what a lot of the paranormal that people are interested in, it shows me that people are interested in spiritual things.
Yes.
That they're interested in spiritual things, perhaps misplaced interest, right? And in it, they're trying to find an explanation. And this is an easier way for them to explain it. Or perhaps it's some way to convince them that the spiritual looks different than what it actually is.
And just as you said, if the demonic can masquerade as angelic figures, they can masquerade as a lot of things.
Yeah.
They really can. And what we see in the Old Testament in particular is that they can be embodied, that angelic and demonic beings we can perceive them as human beings, that we can perceive them as phenomenological experiences that we have, and that we can be oppressed or possessed or demonized. that people can be impacted by these spirit beings that want to do harm. And those are the two categories in Christian belief. And I think they're true to experience, that there are the good spirit beings who serve God and minister to believers all around the world and do the work of God, and that there are servants of Satan, these demonic beings and spirits who follow the god of this age, the false god, Satan, the devil, and that they are out to do harm and to pull people away from God. And that, I think, is the biggest concern that I have, and why I have to be careful how engaged I get with these sorts of things, because I find it fascinating and interesting and sometimes comical and entertaining, but that can be a gateway. And I had a friend actually warn me about that. And I think that she was wise, that you want to be careful how caught up you get into these things, because they can be a gateway to you yourself participating in the darker things of the spiritual realm.
Yeah. And I think connected to that, just to be really clear, because we're talking about demonic and angelic, that this really is kind of an either or. It's not a scale. Yeah. We have so many TV shows now. I'm thinking Lucifer's been a popular one. Supernatural was popular for many, many years, where demons are often portrayed very similarly to humans, as in they can make good choices and change. Sometimes they're anti-heroes or even heroes in movies and TV shows. But will you speak a bit about kind of that cultural view?
Well, I think there's something in us that wants to see, and I feel like this is a good thing. We want to see that anybody is redeemable, right? And in these TV shows, it's showing that even the worst character is redeemable. Obviously, again, misplaced. Like, we know that Satan is not redeemed, but they're exploring that idea of, can people be good? We know that we are good because of Christ. We, like Gunnar said before, that when we talk about the good people, the in-between and the bad people, we know that we're good because of the work of Jesus. Yeah. And here in these television shows, they're trying to say, how is a person good? They're trying to answer that question.
Yeah, I think that you're right. It is an either or, what you're saying, Jenna, especially when it pertains to the spiritual. It is as light and dark as you can imagine, and it is utterly dangerous. But as Julie mentioned earlier, the demonic wants to masquerade as something good, interesting, better. That's what sin is. That's what sin does to us. It is the passing pleasures of this life. And so that is what is going to entice us into these sorts of things. I think the same thing can happen for believers sometimes when the phenomena tied to God becomes the focus other than God himself. When the spiritual gifts, for example, are more important to us than the giver of those gifts.
The miraculous.
The exciting, the supernatural. Yeah. We can become conference junkies, and we're looking for the next great experience that we're going to have from God. And I think that the same thing can happen on the darker side. But all of that is idolatry. Yeah. Ultimately, what we want to be after is the only person, who is God, that can satisfy us and give us the deepest delights of our soul. He should be our chief desire and our chief delight. And everything else is just a distraction, unless it's guiding us and shaping us toward that desire for God.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me and answering some, I'm sure, tricky questions. Definitely a little controversial in today's culture. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe to our videos. If you have any questions for Pastors Julie or Gunnar, put them in the comments below. I'll be sure to pass them on, and we'll see you next week.